Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. On behalf of the Environmental Finance Center Network, welcome to our webinar on empathy and the impact of utility rates on customers. My name is Tess Clark from the Syracuse University Environmental Finance Center, and in a moment, I'll turn things over to my colleagues at the Wichita State University Environmental Finance Center. This webinar is the second installment of our Spring Community Affordability series. We'd love for you to join us again on June 7th to learn more about water affordability, and you can check out our previous webinar as well by visiting efcnetwork.org. Now for some housekeeping items to keep in mind during the webinar. First, everyone will be on mute just to ensure audio quality. I'm sure you're all familiar with this. And second, please use the GoToWebinar question dialog box at any time to ask questions and submit comments or thoughts. We will be certain to save time for questions at the end. You will be receiving a follow-up email that includes a link to all the materials and any other information you may need. We will post a PDF of our presentation materials under the Handouts tab on your control panel. Just wait a few minutes for that to pop up. This training has not been pre-approved for any kind of PDH or CEU credit. However, we can provide certificates as a courtesy. We can't guarantee that the training will receive any type of approval or that it will meet any requirements. Please be sure to attend the entire session, and you must be registered and using your real name. Your certificate of attendance will be emailed to you within 30 days of today's date. And if you have any questions or need assistance with this, please contact smallsystems@syr.edu. Okay, now for a little bit about the Environmental Finance Center Network. Through training and technical assistance, we help water and wastewater systems achieve their goals and stay in compliance with clean and safe water regulations. Please note that as part of this work, we offer free technical services to small water and wastewater systems, and I'll share a link in the chat about our assistance shortly. And here you can see the various centers that make up the Environmental Finance Center Network. You can see that our centers and partner organizations are spread across the country to best serve regional and local needs. We work together to create solutions to difficult how-to-pay issues of environmental protection and improvement. And on that note, I'd like to turn things over to our speakers, starting with Jeff Severin from the Environmental Finance Center at Wichita State University. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you very much. Let me. All right, are you seeing my screen there, Tess?
It looks like we're seeing both screens. I think you're gonna wanna just click one. Just have the single screen showing.
Just a window. Did that fix it?
Yeah, unfortunately, unfortunately, it looks like
this worked just a moment ago.
It did. It's showing both of your screens for some reason. Let's try one more thing, and if not, I will share a copy of your PDF.
It's showing now, Jeff.
Oh, perfect. Great.
But is it just showing one?
Yes.
It's showing the correct one. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody, for surviving that with us. Yeah, my name is Jeff Severin, and I'm on here with my colleague, Michelle DeHaven. We're both program managers with the Environmental Finance Center at Wichita State University. And we're here today to have a conversation with you all about understanding the impact of utility rates on our customers and leading with empathy. So as Tess mentioned, this is the second in a series on community affordability that's hosted by the Environmental Finance Center Network. For those of you that aren't familiar with environmental finance centers, there are 10 EPA regions across the country, and each of those have an EFC associated with it. Michelle and I are part of the EFC for Region 7, which covers Nebraska, Kansas, Iowa, and Missouri. But we collaborate on projects with the other EFCs throughout the US and the US territories as part of this network. So a significant part of what we do is helping communities build capacity to address current and future environmental challenges. And a lot of our work, as was mentioned, is focused on providing training and technical support for water and wastewater utilities. But our EFC also covers a wide range of other environmental topics, including recycling, food waste, air quality, conservation, sustainability, and other important environmental challenges that are facing communities today. So at the WSU EFC, our goal is to empower communities to take action that enhance their environmental and financial health for the benefit of everyone. We strive to meet our mission through our core functions, which are listed there at the bottom. We provide service through leadership, facilitation, and technical assistance. We educate on best practices. We provide professional development support. We analyze and interpret data and regulations, and we create and develop tools and resources to help our communities. Through it all, we connect people, ideas, and communities through meetings, educational and outreach, training, and other ways of engaging and bringing people together to establish those connections and help communities overcome the environmental and financial challenges that they do face. So let's take a quick look at today's agenda. First, we're going to loosely define what we mean by customer impact. Then we'll explore the topic of empathy and its connections with understanding customer impact. And finally, we'll share some helpful resources and discuss how we can use that information and what next steps might be available for your community. So what do we mean when we say customer impact? In short, customer impact is the financial burden that utility rates place on our ratepayers. The long answer consists of a variety of calculations that consider household income, other household expenses, and the percentage of household income that goes towards water bills. Generally speaking, a household should not be paying more than 2.5% of their income on drinking water and no more than 2% of income on wastewater services. These are thresholds that were developed based on interpretations of EPA's guidance of affordability per Safe Drinking Water Act rules. And although EPA does not officially establish these thresholds, they are commonly used to understand and assess the affordability of utility rates. The impact that utility rates have on a community members varies depending on the challenges that each household faces. So we can use numbers to understand the financial burden. However, we have to acknowledge that each community member experiences burdens differently based on their unique situations. And so to attempt to understand these challenges, we must use empathy. Empathy, by definition, is understanding and being aware of and sensitive to the feelings and experiences of another person. So it's sometimes described as putting yourself in someone else's shoes to try to feel what they're feeling. And that's okay as a basic definition. One challenge with it is that it assumes that we can fully understand another person's lived experiences, when in reality that may not be possible, whether it's because of complexities or nuances that exist around each situation, or the impact of different identities, so how their race, gender, ethnicity, ability, or orientation might impact their experience differently. And so to be truly empathetic, we need to be able to acknowledge that we can't always understand what others are going through, but that we still believe their experiences to be valid and true. So it doesn't necessarily require having a shared experience, just sharing in their most emotional response to that experience. So empathy is often confused with sympathy. And we have a spectrum of empathy here just to demonstrate that difference. And the difference is really related to your understanding of how that person feels, your perspective of the situation, your level of effort and engagement. And with sympathy, you might have thoughts about how someone feels, kind of based on your own perspective of how you might feel in that situation. but you don't have a truly emotional connection to that experience. Sympathy can sound something like, oh, I feel bad for you, I hope things get better. And that's kind of where the feeling part ends. Many times the thinking part that dominates sympathy leads to comparing a situation to something that you have experienced and how you felt in that moment. So it quickly turns from centering the other person and their feelings to centering ourselves and our own emotions. And then trying to make some of those comparisons can also create false equivalencies. And that really diminishes the challenges that the person is experiencing and results in passing judgment or responding with a comparison to another situation. So a sympathetic response to a customer might include a statement like, oh, at least your water is still turned on, or at least the sewage isn't backing up in your house anymore. Instead of trying to create comparisons in those moments, we should instead work toward a more empathetic response and take time to actively listen to customers, to understand their perspective, even if it differs from your own, and being able to acknowledge their feelings without trying to minimize them. Even if you can't fully understand how they're feeling because you can't connect it to your own experience, empathy is about sharing in another person's emotions, reflecting on that person's experience, and learning how to be supportive in that moment. So on this chart, then we also have compassion that goes beyond empathy, and it adds an element of action. So with compassion, you're not only making that emotional connection, but you have an active desire to relieve their suffering. We're not going to go into more detail on that, but I just wanted to demonstrate the basic difference there. So an important aspect of empathy is being able to see things from different perspectives. You might remember that social media kind of exploded in 2015 over a picture of a dress. Some people looked at that picture and they saw a blue and black dress, while others saw a white and gold dress. And no matter how heated that great dress debate got, neither side was really wrong about how they perceived the image, even though it was, in fact, a picture of a blue and black dress. You can read the science behind this on your own, but it's all about how each person's brain interprets the image. So, was it taken under a blue sky or under incandescent lighting? Is the fabric shiny or is it matte? Since the photograph is just a photograph without any sort of additional context, your brain has to fill in some of the blanks to identify what it is that you're looking at. So the point here is really that two people can experience the same thing in two very different ways, based on their own interpretations, their assumptions, their lived experiences, and other factors. And as the great dress debate demonstrated, an inability to see things from different perspectives can really get in our way sometimes. So one thing we have to overcome to be successful at this, and something I feel like keeps us from overcoming a lot of challenges and difference in life, is moving past the idea that everything functions in a binary. So it's the idea that you're either right or you're wrong, that you're good or you're bad, or even that it's us versus them. So it's this real either or mentality. And that mentality keeps us from seeing the reality that more than one thing can be true at the same time. I can be a good person and do bad things sometimes. We can say something that we don't think is offensive or isn't intended to be offensive, and it's experienced as offensive or even threatening to someone else. And that's really the difference between intent and impact. So one person can have a positive experience in a given moment while another person's having a very different and negative experience related to that same event. All those things can exist at the same time. And we don't have to be able to come to, no, we do have to, be able to come to terms with that and accept that everyone has a different experience and each of those experiences can be true and valid, even if they don't register as true from your own perspective. So one example from the water industry that you might have seen before, as operators or service providers, we know that the water that's sent out to houses has been tested for multiple contaminants, it's completely safe to drink. If there are still customers who insist on drinking bottled water because they believe there's something wrong with the tap water, even though, from that scientific perspective, we know the water meets all the standards, we can't discount that experience of the customer, because both of these experiences can be true. Knowing that the water is safe to drink and having concerns that there's something wrong with that water. When working with a customer that has these fears about water quality, simply stating that the water is clean or providing a CCR might not be sufficient for them. Instead, we need to lead with empathy and try to understand things from their perspective. They might be seeing like discoloration in the water coming from the tap, or maybe they did in the past and still have concerns about that. They might be aware of other communities where safety is a real concern, and getting their information from other communities and being afraid that that might be the situation in their own community. There might be a certain level of distrust in the government or in the local utility due to some negative experience in the past, or some negative interactions with staff. So it's important to take the time to set aside your own biases, set aside your own perspective on the situation, and really listen to the customer and understand how they're feeling. You may not be able to make any progress with a complaint like this until you're able to work towards seeing things from their perspective. And putting in that extra effort and focusing on empathy improves customer service and adds a human element to what can sometimes be a really technical interaction. Going right to that technical solution can also just be a missed opportunity to truly understand what the problem is. And sometimes, you can come off as cold or even defensive when you go straight to the technical solution. However, responding with empathy instead goes, beyond simply solving a problem for a customer. It improves the customer experience and it helps you solve the problem more effectively. First of all, it helps you, more fully understand the customer and their concerns. By taking time to listen and understand what they're experiencing, you can find a solution that they're actually looking for, and respond in a way that more closely aligns with their expectations. Now, you may not always be able to do exactly what they're wanting to do, but you'll at least have a better understanding of their situation, be able to respond to any specific concerns they have, and let them know, why you can or why you can't meet their expectations. Regardless, it helps you get to the root of the problem that needs to be solved instead of just seeing the problem on the surface level. In doing so, you're also able to demonstrate that you have an interest and a willingness to help them. And that interaction, really listening and working to understand things from their perspective, helps build a more trusting relationship. Practicing empathy creates a stronger connection with the customer, helps them trust that you have their best interests in mind, and that you're being honest if you have to tell them that you're not able to meet their expectations. So what can empathy look like when you're interacting with a customer? First, it involves active listening. So not listening for the pause so that you can respond with a solution or explanation or what it is that you're kind of thinking about, but truly listening and paying attention to what they're saying, paying attention to what they're feeling, and paying attention to what they're not saying. Repeating things back that you think they're trying to get across, to really help confirm that you're understanding things from their perspective, and that they can correct you if you're hearing things differently. Then be really thoughtful about your responses. Avoid the urge to kind of jump to a conclusion, kind of, be able to push back any personal biases that you might have in that moment, and really center the customer and their experience without making judgments, based on any stereotypes, based on your own experiences, or what you believe to be true in that moment. Again, it's not an either or us versus them situation, but an opportunity to see a more complete picture of what's going on. So switching into that binary way of thinking can lead to using more negative language and really unnecessarily negative interactions. So instead, really focus on using positive language for the customers, and follow your curiosity by asking questions, because that will help provide an opportunity for the customer to stay more engaged, to share more of their story, and to help you find the best possible solution for them. So empathy can also be demonstrated in the way that we offer services to customers and using more inclusive practices. For example, offering multiple channels of communication can help customers connect in the way that they feel most comfortable. Instead of just offering a phone number, set up systems for customers to communicate by email or by chat message, and consider using Zoom or another video platform so you can still have some face-to-face interactions, even if that customer can't come to you in person. Even though it's not quite the same, you can at least pick up on some of the nonverbal cues in the conversation using video that are lost in email and even over the phone. And that really goes both ways. It's not just, so that they can see you and pick up on cues, or that you can see them and pick up on those cues, but that they can see that you're actively listening, that you're engaged, that you're able to pick up on those expressions. Reversing roles just a bit here, we always want to know how we're perceived by others, what stories people are telling about us, and in part just to be able to evaluate, what we know to be true, what they might be misinterpreting, as well as, what others might be missing out on. At the same time, it's important that we get to know the stories of others, because what happens when we don't get a complete picture of someone, but only bits and pieces based on assumptions or stories that someone else tells, well, that's where prejudice and stereotypes are born. So we really want to avoid that, even though it takes more time to get the complete story, and really to understand what that story is of the people around us, not just kind of what we think is happening on the surface. Because otherwise we fall back into that trap of playing the stereotypes when working with customers. For example, the myth of the welfare queen that was perpetuated in the 80s and continues to influence our biases today, or the notion that just because someone drives a nice car or has the latest version of an iPhone, is wearing expensive brands, or has their nails professionally done, that we assume that they should then be able to pay their utility bills. But we really don't know the whole story about where those things came from, what might have changed in their lives to impact their finances, or even what sacrifices they're making to keep up appearances and avoid that stigma of poverty in the community. And that's where empathy makes a big difference. It really helps us to understand what's happening in the community, how utility rates are impacting individuals. So we have a quick pop quiz, and you don't have to respond. If you wanna type into the question box to respond to these, you can. Otherwise, just kind of take some time to reflect on this as we go through. But we have a few statements here. The first one is, I'm sorry that you are having a difficult time paying your utility bills. And just thinking about, is that a reflection of sympathy or a reflection of empathy? So it looks like some folks are responding. And most people are saying sympathy. And yeah, this reflects sympathy, because you're really just letting the person know that you feel bad, but there's no sense of understanding or even action in the direction of sympathy. So how might someone respond differently, leading with empathy? If you have some thoughts on that, feel free to drop that in the question box as well. we might have some examples. It doesn't look anybody. Oh, not seeing a poll. No, there's not a poll. It's just a question box that you can put a response into. Yeah, this is great. Got some answers in here. From what I hear, or from what I heard, there's a situation that's causing you not to be able to pay your bills. It sounds like you're going through a tough time. Is there anything I can do to help? Explaining what you're doing to help the customer in this situation. I understand that the utility bills can be a burden to the home economy. Yeah, there's some great responses in here. I'm not going to go through all of them, but really reflecting that not just that you recognize that there's a problem, but that you're understanding the challenges or working to learn more about it. And a lot of you are using a similar response to this one, which is an example of empathy in this case. It's maybe not as clear, but it is moving in that direction of empathy by reflecting that the person understands the customer's feelings of frustration. How about this one? And if you want to respond as well to this one, I got behind on my payments once and I was able to get caught up with a little help. I'm sure you can do it too. Again, feel free to pop in the question box if you feel like it's empathy or sympathy. Neither, I like that question. I wish we could interact more because I want to know why people think neither. Neither, yeah, it's get condescending. Yeah, I would definitely say that this is not an empathetic response. I appreciate people looking at it as being kind of a negative way to respond. Very bootstrap culture, I like that response. But yeah, it's instead of leading with empathy here, this statement is kind of taking the focus off the individual, off the actual problem by comparing it to something else. And really not demonstrating a clear understanding that what that person is feeling, just saying, hey, I've experienced something like that before, and really focusing on themselves instead of on the other individual. And then the final one, you've had a field representative visit 3 times and the problem's still not fixed. This is a frustrating situation for you. Thank you for telling me about it. And again, this is more of an empathetic approach because the person's, repeating back what they're hearing, expressing some understanding about how the customer's feeling, and really demonstrating that they're listening and being engaged. So you all did great on the pop quiz. No grades are being recorded, but I am going to turn things over now to Michelle so she can talk about the links between empathy and customer impact.
Michelle, just so you know, it's your presenter view is currently on. Perfect. Awesome.
Here we go. Can you see that one now?
Yes, it looks great.
Good. Thank you. So we're making this transition from talking about practicing empathy to how does that impact our conversation with our community members regarding their utility rates. So practicing empathy can help utilities and decision makers to set rates, look into potentially establishing bill assistance programs, and be able to plan for upgrades of the utilities, or even in capital improvement plans or community improvement plans that will best serve the community without placing an excessive burden on the lowest income earners within the community. So I'd like everyone to just pause for a minute and think about your household expenses and think about what your top 4 expenses are. So of the bills that you pay, what are the things that are of most priority to you? And just think about that for a minute. And for the purposes of talking about affordability, we look at rent and mortgage, food, taxes, and utility expenses. There are certainly other expenses that should be considered when understanding how families spend their income, but for the purposes of calculations that we're going to talk about later, these are kind of the main expenses that we look at. That said, understanding all the variety of expenses that households are juggling is very important. By understanding that each of our community members have different things happening in their lives, we can consider options for the folks who have lower income, the underrepresented and underserved in our community. And knowing how rates affect our ratepayers can provide insight for how and when to adjust those rates, how and when to develop assistance programs and invest in infrastructure. So we're going to walk through a little bit of a scenario here, a couple different scenarios to kind of understand the decision-making process that our community members may face while on a limited income. So in the US, the average household size is 3, and just over 50% of households have a child or children between the ages of 6 and 17. This is the case for married households and single adult households. So we're using this for our scenario here. So imagine that you're a family of 3, there are 2 adults and 1 13-year-old child. We're going to show some expenses here. These are just averages for Kansas because that's where Jeff and I are from. So that's what we pulled up. And these expenses will vary based on location as well as wages. So imagine this as your household situation. Your family has a net monthly income of $2,060, and that's after you've paid for some medical insurance and required taxes, so Social Security and Medicare taxes that come out of your check regardless. And this is assuming that you would be considered exempt. There aren't any other taxes coming out. This is just basic kind of taxes. And then you have a variety of expenses, your rent, your phone, your power, your utilities, food, transportation, all of those things that are required when you have a household. And considering the income of this family and their family size in Kansas anyway, and I know a lot of the other states in EPA Region 7 and surrounding areas, this family would not qualify for food assistance programs at the gross wages of $2,500. So that ends up with a remaining income for the month of a loss of $40. So that means that the wages that we're bringing in are not enough to cover all of our expenses. So we're going to launch a poll question here to just say, what would you do to ensure that you could pay all of your expenses? I'll just wait just a couple minutes and let folks answer that question.
And I'm just chiming in here. I see about 50% of folks responding so far. And I think if we just I'm going to count down from 4 and then I'm going to close the poll. So in 3, 2, and 1, last chance to respond. And now I'm closing the poll. And here are the results.
So of those of you who responded, more than half of you said get an additional job, which certainly can be an option to increase income. Some also said lower grocery expenses. That is one that a lot of folks do tend to gravitate towards. But considering the increased costs of things now, that may be even more challenging for community members. Finding an additional job can pose other challenges as well, as far as increased transportation expenses and things like that could be be prohibitive. Imagine for a moment that this child was younger and perhaps 6 or 7 years old. Daycare and things like that would have to be considered. So these are just some of the ideas that we think about when we're looking at some of the folks in our community who are at the lower end of the income spectrum, that they may be facing decisions such as, what do I do? How do I increase my income or decrease my expenses? What's necessary? What isn't, etc. So we're just going to kind of throw a wrench into the system here. And sometimes life happens. Unexpected occurrences can very quickly come in and disrupt our lives and our finances. So considering the tight budget, then if the car breaks down, what do we do? So the car breaks down and will cost about $350 to repair. We're going to throw out another poll here, and you'll tell me what you do. Repair, try to finance a new car, or pay the repair costs.
Okay, and I'm seeing about 40% of people have responded so far. Yes, I heard that there was a little bit of a choppiness with the audio for a second, but I think it's resolved so far.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I think it's resolved. And now we're at about 70%, so I'm gonna go ahead and count down from 3 and close the poll. So in 3, 2, and 1, I'm now closing the poll, and here are the results.
So many of you said to pay the repair costs, and another large chunk of you said, wait, I have money to repair it. Very few said don't repair it, finance a new car. So there are consequences of each of these options.
Michelle, I think the audio is cutting in a lot.
Consistently facing deficits, how do you put money aside for an unexpected expense? Transportation expenses may decrease somewhat since your family is now down to 1 car, but how does each adult get to work and back? Are extra miles traveled that will still take the required budgeted transportation expenses? Even if there is money in the transportation budget to use to save, how long will it take? What happens if that car breaks down? It's possible that one adult may have to miss work due to the lack of transportation. So these are some of the consequences of waiting to save the money for repair. Very few of you chose don't repair and purchase another vehicle. So the question there is, can you afford another car payment? What about the down payment? Will you have to resort to predatory lending or car financing in order to get into a vehicle so that you can get to and from work? And then the majority of you said that you would pay the repair costs. With little to no savings, which bill or bills do you not pay in order to repair the car? The impacts of not paying a bill in full or even partially could have impacts on your finances for months, possibly years down the road. Accounts in default could affect your credit score, your ability to secure housing, late fees, reconnection fees, extra deposits, all of these types of things that are associated with getting behind in bills can continue the spiral of deficits exponentially. Of course, there are benefits to any of these situations, but these are the choices that some of the folks in our communities who are at the lower end of the income spectrum are facing. So now we're going to go with another kind of life happens. You get a respiratory infection, which some of us may have experienced in the last couple of years. And as we have discovered, illnesses can have extraordinary impacts on the people in our community. So imagine that you develop a respiratory infection that requires antibiotics and you need to be off work for a couple days. You have sick leave, but only at 75% of your pay. You must pay a $5 copay for the medication, which is all the cash that you have left until payday, which is 2 days away. So we're going to launch a poll here to see, what is it that you're going to do? Are you going to stay home and wait for payday to get the medication? Go to work, wait for payday to get the medication, use the money to get the medication and stay home, or use the money to get the medication and go to work.
All right, great. It looks like we have about 40% of folks submitting a response, and I know it's hard to make, this is a tough decision to make this quickly, but we're just gonna try to give you maybe a few more seconds here just to keep things rolling. So I'm closing the poll in 3, 2, and 1. And here are the results.
So it's a hard one, right? There are positives and negatives to each of these scenarios. So let's walk through some of it. So if you decide, very few of you decided to stay home and wait for payday to get the medication. If that was an option that you chose, some of the challenges with that are, you're going to lose 25% of your income for each day that you're home, and you could get potentially even more sick by not treating. So bacterial infection, it's just going to continue to get worse without those antibiotics. And so you risk further impacts that could result with more doctor visits, more medication, maybe even a hospital visit, and maybe even more days off of work. The next option was sorry about that. Was to go to work and wait for payday to get the medication. So you might decide, I just have to go to work, I can't lose the income. You're going to risk spreading the disease to your coworkers. And although you don't lose pay immediately, you do risk further illness by delaying treatment, which could still result in days of work missed. I apologize. For some reason, my slideshow, here we go. Use the money, the option that was most chosen was use the money to get the medication and stay home. So the medication will get you feeling better. Those 2 days off work, you're going to lose income. Considering your family's income, that's a loss of about $50 for the month. While that doesn't seem like a whole lot to some, to others that could be a significant loss, especially if that's the cost of the water bill, or at least a large section of the water bill that just won't get paid. And finally, you use the money to get medication and then go to work, which was the second most popular choice here. And so again, you risk kind of spreading that disease to your coworkers, and you don't lose pay immediately, but you could risk further illness by delaying the treatment or by delaying the rest that you would need that the doctor mentioned in order to get well, and could still result in days missed. So there are all these different consequences that you had about 40 seconds to try to make that decision. Oftentimes people have to go back and forth with, what do I do? Do I use the last money that we have to get this medication? Do I miss work? What are the consequences of each of these actions? And sometimes these hurdles that life throws at us can really be negatively impactful to those in our community who experience low incomes. So how do people decide what to pay? Most recommendations from financial counselors, budget specialists, etc., recommend that you prioritize expenses. What must you have? What other bills won't matter if you don't have a home? Why pay for water and electricity if you don't have a house, for example? Power and water are essential, but what about your phone, your transportation? How do you make decisions about what is most important to your household? What are the things that you can and can't live without in order to determine which bills to pay if you're experiencing a loss of income? So how do people pay? how do people who make these decisions, how do they inevitably pay for these bills? So they have options for paying for what are deemed essential services, such as power and water. However, income limitations, extent of assistance needed, amount of funding available for assistance can inhibit assistance programs. Some communities have utility assistance programs that help cover water and wastewater expenses. The low income energy assistance program can help with energy costs, and many communities have rescue plan funds that are helping community members who are impacted by COVID-19. Some nonprofit organizations such as United Way and various religious organizations offer assistance to community members who are struggling financially. But if those options aren't available or your household doesn't qualify, sometimes you are faced with last resort options. If you have credit cards, sometimes those are used to pay bills, but that will only go so far and end up putting people further in debt. Personal loans are the same. Often community members who are struggling will take loans from payday loan businesses, which is just a predatory practice that can lead to a spiral of debt and delinquencies. And worst case scenario, sometimes people may declare bankruptcy, which has numerous impacts on a household's finances and future financial capacity. So the impact to this credit score for a bankruptcy can prohibit home ownership, even home rental, car ownership, and even potentially job prospects. So this kind of financial spiral that our lower income folks may be experiencing can lead to lifelong negative impacts. And these are the things that we have to think about when we're talking about, do we need to raise rates in the utility, and how much capacity does our community have to support needed upgrades? So we talk a lot about our customers and our community members, but it's also important to consider and understand the impact of water rates on the utility. So if people are unable to pay their bills, the utility doesn't get necessary revenue to continue their operations. Our water and wastewater utilities have minimal standards that they must meet to be in regulatory compliance. However, many utilities strive to provide service that exceeds beyond the minimum standards. For example, aesthetic problems with drinking water, such as an off color or a taste, can be acceptable if all contaminant levels are within regulation. But most of us have clear, tasty drinking water coming out of the faucet. To maintain minimum standards and determined level of service, utilities require sustainable, reliable funding for day-to-day operations, as well as supporting reserve funds, planning for upgrades, major repairs, replacements, etc. Municipalities and utilities are often juggling the different needs of the community and the utility along with the capacity of each. And that leads us to the data. There are some widely accepted measures for affordability of water and wastewater rates. As Jeff mentioned at the beginning, households shouldn't pay more than 2.5% of their income for drinking water and 2% of their income for wastewater. So how do we know if our community members are being burdened by utility rates? You know, we talk about empathy and understanding these different perspectives, but how do we really get down to understanding what is happening in our community? We can use the metrics. So there are several metrics that use various formulas based off census information, utility rates, and these are some of the common metrics that you may see or hear referenced in affordability research, in tools, and other webinars, etc., that can help you to understand from a quantitative data perspective what kind of affordability concerns your community may have. So we have the residential indicator, the poverty prevalence indicator, household burden, and the affordability ratio, and hours at minimum wage. And again, these are data, these are metrics that use various formulas based off various information that can give you an outlook of your community's affordability. And there are a couple of tools that can be very helpful that will show you some of these things for your community. So the Southwest EFC developed the Water Affordability Self-Assessment Tool. You can use this tool to assess whether your rates are affordable according to several different measures, including median household income, percent of population out of below poverty line, etc. You can also use it to do an analysis of which of your customers would be most affected by changes in the rate structure. And then the EFC at UNC developed the Affordability Assessment Tool, and this dashboard provides insights into affordability and utility rate burden in your community. So the tool can then provide you with graphs and charts to allow you to assess your community's metrics and potential affordability concerns. So what these tools can do is it can show you from a data perspective what is happening in your community financially from a data-centric point of view, and then you can start to tell the story of what's happening for community members. Which groups are experiencing a higher burden of utility rates compared with others, etc. So we have all this information. Now what do we do with it? So the charts and graphs are tools that can be used to share affordability concerns with city leaders, utility workers, the community. It can help to start conversations that can help you inform the community about why their rates are so important and lead to conversations about the processes required to provide clean, safe drinking water. These metrics can also be helpful when it comes to rate setting and understanding your community's capacity to financially support investment. So we take all of the information together. We think about the stories that we're hearing from our communities, such as the examples that Jeff provided, whether we're providing sympathy or empathy. And then we look at this data, the quantitative data, to be able to tell the story about what our community members are experiencing, how we need to approach adjusting rate structures, how we need to approach investment in infrastructure and upgrades, and how we can continue that conversation with our community members. And with that, we're about 10 minutes out. I'd like to open it up for any questions that anyone might have about any of the things that we talked about today.
Thanks, Michelle. I am looking, and there's a couple really nice comments in the questions box. It looks like we have one commenter that's talking about some inequities in their water system, where the landowners are the ones paying the water bills, but often using owning a lot of properties and not living directly in the neighborhood, and the tenants are often not as wealthy. The landlords are haggling with the utility and don't want to pay the bills, claiming they can't afford it, and they have horses and stuff, and the commenter feels that the other tenants are subsidizing their use. I thought this was a really interesting scenario, and I wonder if there's any tools we might suggest or any comments we can offer to this person.
Just going to read back through that question a little bit to make sure that
Yeah, I think I finally figured out how to unmute myself. But yeah, this is a really complex situation, and it sounds like something that you have been trying to address for a while, maybe, Dina. And I think part of it is, thinking about the empathy piece is, working with those landowners, shareholders, to help, maybe first understand if they're in a different situation that maybe appears to be on the surface, but also helping them understand the situation that their tenants are in. If it's an issue of water that's not being used by the tenants, is there a way to maybe meter that water use separately?
And I think it would be great, you could encourage your utility to consider some different rate structures, some that might include some affordability measures as well as some conservation-based measures. And we can send you some information on stuff like that too.
There are communities who are struggling with this very topic, with the way that rental income is set up within their community. And this might be a conversation with your city leaders as well, that allows renters to pay their bill rather than the landlord. And that's something that a conversation that could be had with your city leaders who make those policies, as well as the landowners and the renters as well. There is a question saying, how have you implemented these tools to evaluate EJ issues and planning for investment? These tools, if you have some GIS skills, you can import both the EJ screen data and the background data from these tools into a map yourself. What I do though, because that poses a lot of challenges, but what I do is I bring them up next to each other so that I can see, because they're both based on census block. So you can really start to see on the EJ screen where different populations, different demographic indicators are in census blocks within your area. And also you can do that with some of these tools as well. One of the challenges with evaluating your community with these tools is that it is on a census block area, and many of our smaller systems, their census tracts are not entirely inside of the city limits. So then you get into having to calculate percentages and things like that in order to understand how much of your community is facing low income. Another thing to consider when you're looking at both the EJ screen as well as some of these tools is how many of your community members are renting versus owning, because sometimes there's other implications with people, not necessarily just renting, but people who are receiving home assistance programs. So anything from HUD, Section 8, things like that, that's something to consider as well. There was another question. How do you propose to balance the customer's needs with the failing system's needs? That's the question of the day, right? I know across the nation, we're facing major infrastructure failures in our utilities, and that is why this conversation is so important. In our rural areas, we are seeing population decline, which means financial capacity is declining in those communities that are the ones that often need infrastructure upgrades the most. So it's having conversations not just within the community, but within an area around that community, within the state, and larger, to how we can best serve some of these communities who are experiencing these system failures and also experiencing poverty, and figuring out what is best. There's not a one-size-fits-all kind of approach that we can take. It's going to depend on the system and the community. There are some other tools out there that can be shared that show, the community's capacity to sustain the funding needed for infrastructure improvements. So there are some other options out there for how we can approach that very topic, and it's going to take continual conversation and continual brainstorming. Are there sources of funding? It says, are there sources of funding efforts? There's a lot of funding coming down in the bipartisan infrastructure law, and organizations like the EFCs and other entities are trying to sort through it, get that information out to people as soon as possible, so that our utilities and our communities can access those funds as soon as possible. The affordability assessment does not include capital improvement planning. It's just general rates. The 2% metric was determined by EPA. It was, there is a formula. We can send out the memo for that to really get into the methodology of that, but that was something determined by EPA for affordability metrics within their compliance. I'm not sure how much longer, because I do see that we are after 1 o'clock. Can we continue with questions, or are we going to?
So what we can do is we can go another 5 minutes. Folks that have to go, no problem. And if you do, don't worry if you are one of the folks that likes to get our certificates for your own personal records, knowing that we don't get them pre-approved. Being on for an hour is just sufficient for that. And Michelle, yeah, please feel free. You can take questions for another 3 or 4 minutes. That's fine.
Okay, great. Yeah, there's some great questions in here. And his suggestions on how to deal with these landlords would be awesome. Yeah, I think that's going to take more conversation with more people from your community in order to really get to the what's really at the root of the problem. So that's kind of that leading with empathy a little bit. These landlords are probably coming from somewhere. So what is their story, and how can we listen to them to problem solve and come up with a solution that will work for everyone. Have you considered some type of survey that a community can use to determine the quality of water they want to afford? This is a great option for communities to do, is to send out have some type of communication with their community to say, you know, here are the different things, you know, we know that the water is clean. We take extra efforts to make sure that it doesn't come out dingy looking, even though it's clean and safe to drink. You know, what does that mean to you? Are you comfortable drinking water that's maybe a tiny bit off color, but is still safe to drink? Can you trust your utility that it's safe to drink? So having that conversation with the community is very important. And I think that's something that we encourage our utilities and our city leaders to really engage with the people in your community to talk about why you have to pay for water. So many people do have that water should be free mentality, and water is free, but making it safe to drink is not. So explaining all of the infrastructure and the labor and all of the things that go in to make sure that we're getting clean, safe drinking water is an important thing. So having that conversation and understanding what your community is telling you that they want and how you can balance that with requirements, general requirements as well as upgrades that are needed. The 2.5% index of affordability does not reflect the lower income residents. I have heard that 20% of median. I'm not quite sure what you're asking here. So feel free to to rephrase, or my contact information will be up on the next screen. You can feel free to reach out to me, and we can have a conversation to address your question. I think we got them all. Jeff, did you see any that I may have missed?
No, I think you've covered all the questions that are here. And if there's anything that we did miss, yeah, we can go back and make sure that questions get responded to.
Absolutely. So coming soon, there's 2 more events in this series coming up. So affordability considerations for utility rate design is coming up in June. Implementing bill payment assistant program is coming up in July. You can find those at our efcnnetwork.org upcoming events. This is contact information for Jeff and I. So if you have any further questions or would like to talk about this anymore, feel free to reach out and give us a call. And we'll see you again soon.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Jeff. And have a great afternoon, everyone.